Hi, everyone. This is Shawn Egan from the family's SCN2A, the Chief Scientific Officer, and I'm really excited today to have the executive team from Praxis Precision Medicine, Marcio Souza, CEO, Stephen Petrou, Chief Scientific Officer, and Brian Spar, the Chief of Staff, all here to talk about the very first SCN2A data readout for our community ever. So this is an important day and something that they're here to talk through these data elements. Just as a reminder, Praxis Precision Medicine is developing, currently has 2 drugs in the clinic for SCN2A gain of function, PRAX-562 and PRAX-222, which I think today was named for the first time elsunersen, also an exciting day. So I'll hand it over to Marcio Souza to walk through today's data updates.
That's good. And Shawn, thank you so much for the invitation to have this conversation. There is not a lot of times, or better, there's only going to be one time that we have a first. And we were expecting for this first for a long time, and not as long as all the parents that have to deal with all of you in our community, all these kids that have to deal with the condition every single day. But it's a very important day for us. And I hope it's equally important for all of you as well, with some incredibly exciting data for PRAX-222, which is really the only drug being developed in the clinic, what I would call developed for real, right, on people receiving it for this disease. So we're thrilled. It's really incredible to start this revolution on helping these patients. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to present some of the data. So what I'm going to do, if that's okay, is to walk all of us through some of the slides we had today, some of the presentation we had today, and maybe a little bit more in the context for a community that actually understands this, right? So we're not here, don't have to tell you how problematic, how exciting it is to be able to grasp what's going on in this disease, but modify it, but also the consequence by not doing it. So what we are setting up to do with 222 is really completely change that, and we're going to be touching on 562 as well, as you mentioned, towards the end. You know the picture, the clinical picture of SCN2A gain of function D, right? I don't have to even try to explain to all of you, because you probably could explain to me much better than I can ever explain. What is being probably neglected, I would say, on this disease is this direct connection between increased seizure activity with increased risk of SUDEP that is being pretty well documented across the board in epilepsy, but maybe not so linked. When we look into the natural history of the condition, the one thing all patients present is seizure increase. So obviously we're trying to go all the way to the end and modify the disease at large, but we need to start with a point where we can measure reliably and the FDA and other agents accept it. So that's where we started. It so goes that, as again, we know from a mission perspective, we want to completely change the course of this disease, but it's going to have to be, for the time being at least, one patient at a time. And maybe ever it's going to be like that, one patient at a time. And we're committed to get this to the end. As I mentioned earlier today, it came a little bit in a different way than we expected the very first patient, which was an emergency access request for this drug. A very severe case of 2A gain of function with encephalopathy like presenting pre-birth, with convulsive status epilepticus at birth, uncontrollable, and we're able to, together with the medical team that was taking care of these kids and with their family, to start PRAX-222. What was really reassuring for all of us, and we understand for the family and all the physicians caring for that, is how safe it was. Right? I think the first do no harm. It's for and foremost what we're trying to do with drug developments, but really no adverse events or serious adverse events related to the drug, which was very reassuring. After 7 doses of the treatment, the part here on the that you are seeing on the right-hand side is after 6 doses the evaluation, but we actually just they just confirmed the conducting the 7th dose, and the picture is very similar. It goes without saying, you can look into the slides, that it's not normal for a kid this severe to actually progress so positively with the introduction of a treatment. We were humbled by it. We continue to be excited by it, and we continue to treating these kids. What's also quite positive in this case is now we are more than 7 months after the first administration, right? So we really have on an incredibly severe young kids a relatively long period of time, really without any safety findings. But that brings us to the experiments being done here, just experiment meaning a clinical trial in the United States, what's called EMBRAVE. You all might be quite familiar with it. Just a reminder, was an observation period to the baseline, and then monthly dose of 1 milligram. As ASOs go, 1 milligram per month is very small of a dose, not from an effectiveness perspective, but for a general concentration and volume perspective. We're aiming for a very potent drug because we want to make sure we minimize everything else that happens when you give like a lot of drug in the brain as well. Spacing every 4 to 5 weeks, as you can see here, and collecting data throughout on not only the safety, but the efficacy as well that we are seeing on these patients, right? What we see after 1 dose, just like the other patient that I showed on the emergency access, is a very dramatic reduction in comparison to the month before that was observed, right? So this is not a spot check. This is really very rigorous compared to the previous one. And you continue throughout. I don't have to educate any of you on how hard it is to reduce this kind of magnitude. We're talking about hundreds of seizures reduction here collectively in this period of time, with a median here across the board of very high magnitudes, with every patient from a median perspective benefiting. So made us incredibly happy and yet very humbled, as I mentioned before. When you look into days without seizure, like as parents, I think we all like improvements in general. I'm sure for parents as SCN2A kids, you like seeing improvements, but then the question becomes, are other things happening, right? Are the days without seizures happening? Are the patients being more alert and things like that? And we're seeing all of that. But what's measurable here that is quite dramatic is almost double of the number in a given month on that period without any occurrence of a seizure. So quite dramatic in a positive way on our view. From a safety perspective, you can see here, it was basically the summary I gave before, fairly uneventful, as that's what we want from a safety perspective to be. And we expect to be the same moving forwards. Now, this is incredibly exciting. So you might be asking, like, where do we go from here, right? Being the first also means that there is no clear path on when something this positive, this dramatic happen. So we are meeting with the FDA as soon as you possibly can. We've been moving very fast as a company. We're going to continue committing to you to continue to move fast. And the intent is to initiate this global study, which will enroll a much larger cohort of patients starting the beginning of next year. So that is the updates on PRAX-222. Again, thanks for the opportunity to share with all of you today. And I sincerely hope, you are as excited as we are on bringing these drugs to other patients that are in needs, and for this to serve as a springboard for all the other patients that we cannot serve right now, like the loss of function patients and the hybrid phenotype patients as well. So thanks, and maybe we can have a conversation a little bit about what you think and the questions you might have for us. Just 1 second, Shawn. I don't think I can hear you.
Ooh, I think I was on mute. Classic flaw.
Okay.
First off, thank you so much for walking through the data. Incredibly exciting stuff. And for me, from a scientist and as a parent, the first thing that I think of is this is proof of concept. This is proof of concept that targeting SCN2A can lead to clinical benefit. A small number of patients, but really encouraging data. And that's something I think our entire community should celebrate and be excited about. Talking to families that are kind of considering clinical trials, I think the first thing you touched on it towards the end is, what are next steps? You mentioned kind of a global trial. What could that look like? What age range for patients? Are there likely that there'll be placebo in that trial? And what would the eligibility criteria look like? And it could be too early to speculate, but just any comments for parents, strongly considering this as the next option.
Yeah, I think it is a little bit early to solidify, but probably not so early to tell you philosophically how we're thinking about this, right? We still need agreement with the agents, of course, with the FDA and others. But just like for this first study, we are always attempting to be as broad as we can from an age perspective. The youngest patient on this study was 2, the oldest was 14. So we see we really are trying to add as many as possible there. Obviously, we had this newborn as well included. That discussion whether or not we would be able to include patients younger than 2 is one we intend to have as well in due time with the FDA. In 3 months, every anti-seizure medication in the United States has been approved on a 3-month study. I think that is an expectation from those disease-modifying treatments that you treat for longer. So we want to have that debate as well with the agents, since you might see the primary effect pretty quickly as we're seeing. But then as you continue those, you might be seeing other benefits that require a lot more time. Just like the disease is in place for a long period of time, the benefits that are more secondary might come a longer period of time. There might be an interest. So let's say if you double that initial period, that might be something to start thinking about. Geographically, obviously, we're still committed to continue to run studies in the United States. We had tremendous success with this. Great site, great support for the patients with Dr. Willis in Memphis. And we intend to continue doing this across the nation. There is very high interest from Europe already talking to us. And there has been a historical great interest in Latin America as well, with a very well-organized community there. I think our intent would be to really try to go to these 3 major geographies that would cover a very large population of these patients. In terms of the timing, yesterday would be too late because these patients and I'm sure you would agree, need this today. So our commitment is, if it cannot be faster, it's because it could not be faster. But we're going to run this as quickly as possible. Our expectations early next year to start it. And I don't think on the inclusion-exclusion criteria we're quite there yet, because they're required really talking to the agents. We are biophysically characterizing every patient mutation, continue to build that, because we want to make sure we have the appropriate patients on this study. That's where we are right now. I think we're on mute again, Shawn.
Classic. The one other element that I think our families are going to be, really looking at closely is the safety, and the safety looks about as good as you could hope for at this point in time. But anything that you could add just from people that haven't had experience with clinical trials of how their child is monitored and what steps are in place to make sure that their child is as safe as possible?
Yeah, so trials are monitored to a place that if you had 100% side effect, I would even say it's possibly positive, because we're really looking for anything, right? So I'll give an example. A patient is coming, have a flu, like have colds, that is reported in the report form. So really everything that happens, we have an idea of what's going on. Lab values are not only locally analyzed, but centrally analyzed by an independent lab. Something when you give an intrathecal delivery, you want to make sure not increasing like a lot the protein levels on the CSF fluids, right? Things like that. So a lot of parameters are taken into consideration. But the ones we, as drug developers, really care about are the ones elicited by the drug. So things that not happen randomly to you and I or to our kids, but happens because or likely because you give the drug. And that's the ones we pay a lot of attention. Our monitoring plan, that's what things like that are called, like what we look into, were, I would say, above and beyond what is expected. So we're not even going to the minimal. We really went way beyond. And to this point, and things change, but to this point being very safe. For, again, it's a limited number of observations. I think we should always be careful. We're going to continue to be incredibly careful. But this is like, does not look like it's a showstopper by any stretch of imagination in terms of the safety.
And our children are generally pretty sick, so they're always kind of having some kind of something that's being reported. So, not seeing anything above and on top of that, I think is really impressive for a molecule at this stage. The one other interesting aspect that you presented on today is a patient being treated through an expanded access program. And I don't think a lot of our community knows what that means. Essentially, it's a patient that's treated outside of the clinical trial. But maybe could you talk a little bit more about what that means, and for any patient that is in a situation like that, how would they tackle being considered for that?
Yeah, so both in the United States and outside of the US, in most countries, there is a mechanism to request drugs that are not necessarily approved if they are deemed necessary for the condition the patient's in. Right? And by no means I'm endorsing this. I want to be incredibly clear. Those are decisions that have to be made exclusively by the patient, their family, and the treating physician. But there are the most extreme of such situations where it's an emergency. And the way the emergency happens is if the intervention does not happen, it's very likely the outcome is fatal of the condition or something. And the United States has a mechanism like that. Several countries in Europe, 7 countries in Latin America have as well. It was through one of those mechanisms that we got the requests, right? So the certainty was that the kid wouldn't recover. And then they had to go through the entire paperwork process. Like, this is not something, oh, I want it and I get it tomorrow, but rather regulatory agencies have to be involved, ethical boards have to be involved, the physicians, and then after all of that is gathered, they come to us and they ask if it would be okay. And in this case, we got together like a group in the company, and that was deemed appropriate. There are very few cases to actually cross the threshold, but that is an alternative that exists may a situation like this arise.
And I think that, in order to have access to an EAP, your child has to be incredibly sick. And, I think that does also resonate for, the level of potential benefit that your molecule is showing in this case, and that you had, an incredibly sick child that has then stabilized being on the molecule. Again, it's N of 1, there's no placebo, but that resonates to families that have very sick children.
Right.
So 222 is, the data update today, but you do have another molecule in the clinic that our children can enroll, also for gain of function. That's PRAX-562. For families considering 222 versus 562, what are some things that they should be considering?
Yeah, so 562 is a small molecule, right, that selectively modulates the neurons when they are in a state that is triggered by basically dysfunction on their firing. So on that regard, while we believe in our preclinical models show that to be incredibly efficacious in SCN2A, it also can be efficacious in several other DEs. So the aim of the molecule is twofold. So one is it's a very straightforward development plan, right? This is a relatively simple, well-thought path to develop molecules. It is enrolling right now in a phase 2 in the United States and outside of the US as well, in Europe at this point in time. We are really wrapping it up, I would say, soon the last patients there. So if there is a lot of patients interested, I would encourage deeply to actually reach out and look into our postings and look into the trial websites and get involved. That is expected to have a very profound effect as well, but we don't know yet. We are not there on that one. I think in the end of the day, you would ask, why would a company develop 2 drugs for the same population? And the first part of the answer I'll give you is that should make our commitment to this community very clear. Right? We really care about addressing that. The second is we know that humans are not just one size fits all, and we might really have more or less benefit by one, the other, or both in the future. And we got to go back to our mission to really helping here. So we decided we're going to be doing both of them. The 562 study is going to be larger. It's going to require more patients a priori. So we also need more engagement from the community, both right now and moving forwards. And at the same time, it's a little bit less burdensome on the patients, right? It's a fully decentralized study, meaning anyone can participate from home. That is obviously a clinical team and all the controls that are used on a clinical study, but the drug is delivered home, the visits are remote. So from being easier to participate, the 562 is very, very simple. Even when you expand next year the cohort for 222, it is still going to be restricted to some sites. And that might be an important consideration there as well as the families are deciding.
Perfect. So maybe just a recap: 562 oral, and you can participate in the clinical trial right from your home. 222, a little bit more rigorous clinical trial experience, but maybe a little bit more transformative potential. Is that fair?
Oh, yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. They're both very rigorous. So I'll go back there. And I don't think we quite know yet of the transformative aspect of 562. We do know, like today on 222, what I would say is more temporal. Like one is right now can participate because it's open. That's 562. And the 222 is going to take a little bit longer to restart. And at the end of the day, patients might benefit from one or the other. But the other aspects, one being oral, the other one being intrathecal, one being a hospital, the other one being a home, might be important factors for families to consider.
Sure. Well, I think that pretty much wraps up all the questions I had. I wanted to thank you again for your time and the data update today. And do you have any questions for me today?
No, I think you expressed a little bit your view there, Shawn. As a parent, I thank you for the advocacy they're doing. It motivates us a lot. I hope you're not letting anyone down. Today, we're definitely very, very excited about it, and it's a lot of great work. But it wouldn't mean anything if it was not like people like you and the rest of the community behind to motivate us. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Marcio.